Thanks, Shlomo. Our final speaker is Professor Rózsa. She's a distinguished academician from Budapest. She's currently Executive Director of the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs. Her academic background and current research interests span European and Middle Eastern affairs. I must say it's a particular pleasure and privilege for me to welcome Erzsébet to INSS after many years of acquaintance through our work together in UNESCO. So, Erzsébet.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank for this opportunity for me to be able to address you today. And if Professor Sasser said that every Jew has a story, every Hungarian has a story too, or maybe even two, because anytime I go to a Middle Eastern conference, practically all the people coming from Israel would come to me and tell me, my wife is Hungarian, my grandfather was a Hungarian, my neighbor is a Hungarian. But I have also a personal story,
my
Professor.
My wife is not Hungarian.
Okay.
My first teacher of Arabic.
Professor, you may not remember, but in '93, when I was visiting Israel for the first time in my life, I asked for the opportunity to have an interview with you in your center, and that was the first time that we met. Thank you again for that. Now, coming to our topic today, what I thought would like to do is to look at what relevance for arms control the turmoil in the Arab world could mean, could have. And if we look at the main issues regarding arms control, I would put in the first place the political will, which is obviously necessary to conduct any arms control activities. It should be done through negotiations by state actors, so far we see, and here again, when we come to the Middle East, we do have some problems because we do have some non-state actors or semi-state actors. If we look at the Hezbollah, whatever that qualifies should be looked at from time to time again, and it should be a joint effort, again, by not always clear by whom, if we come to the Middle East. Here we have an even bigger problem with the state actors, because as it was presented here, the state actors, or at least some of the state actors, are undergoing a profound change. They are in transition, so sometimes we don't even know with whom we are dealing with, because in Tunisia we have just had elections, in Egypt we are still waiting for, and we don't know where Libya is going to. So how are we going to organize negotiations, meaningful negotiations, when we don't know exactly whom we are negotiating with? It is again not clear in the Middle East if at this precise moment, and the moments are shifting of course, could we speak about a joint Arab commitment for arms control negotiations? Exactly because of the transition that is going on. Obviously, the state actors would say yes, but when we come to the point, I am not always very sure. And we also know that by now there are if we look at the nuclear issue specifically, there are very differing interests between the Maghreb, the Mashrek and the Gulf, meaning that in the Mashrek they always still claim that Israel is the first issue, in the Gulf they say it is Iran, and in the Maghreb, well, yes, they don't care. Either they mention both or none, it's different. And what could be the conditions under which there could be a unified Arab position on arms control in general, or nuclear arms control specifically? From the point of view of Israel, I think that there was a very important shift, most visible in the nuclear issue, that the threat perception shifted from the Arab countries to Iran, definitely, and that is a big change. And I am fully aware of the fact that there is a debate in Israel on Iran being an existential threat or no. I've just read Mr. Halevi's statement. We know that there is a huge controversy. And what could be the conditions under which Israel would be interested or could go forward with such negotiations? As was mentioned before by Professor Sasser and General Brom as well, there is an extremely changed environment. And the environment is specifically changed since the last such arms control exercise is the ACRIS group in the Arab-Israeli peace process. But what I would like to claim that it was not the Arab Spring that changed the context. These changes were already underway, and General Brom also pointed to the fact that before the Arab Spring started, there was a new situation in the Middle East with three great powers, none of which was an Arab country or a group of Arab countries. And the fact is that the Arab countries cannot challenge Israel anymore. They just, practically, they cannot finance it. And therefore, the threat perception should be different as well. Then, of course, there was the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union disappeared, the United States still is the unquestioned #1 power in the Middle East as well. However, its respect or maybe the trust in the United States has dramatically decreased in the past few years. At first we thought that maybe it was due to President George W. Bush, but now we see that President Obama, towards whom there were huge expectations, also in arms control and also in nuclear arms control, his public opinion figures are down to the same limit or maybe even under it, which for me is very surprising. And what is very important as well, that the regional dynamic in the region has become much more important than great power politics. And I think that this is relevant when we look at each and every cases. And what I mostly mean by that although, of course, the US is there, without the US, no arms control cannot be foreseen in the region, but more independent behaviors or policies are pursued in the region, policies that are more independent from great power influence than before. And here, if we look at some of the countries, then of course our beloved Turkey, and I think that the Turkish case is absolutely specific. However, I would like to claim that it still has its roots in the Atatürk saying of peace at home, peace abroad, because I think that the zero problem with the neighbors policy can be connected to that. And now in the Arab countries they are speaking of the neo-Ottomanism, whatever that means. There was, during the Arab Spring, quite a lot of talk about the Turkish model or the Iranian model. I think the Iranian model has failed, absolutely. It didn't really have a chance from the very beginning. The Turkish model seemed a favorite slogan and a favorite concept all through the region. However, I would like to claim that in the end it will be an Arab model, or should I rather say, a set of different Arab models in the region. Every country is different, as was said here before, and every country will have a way of its own. In this context, however, of course, we can point to the relationship of Turkey to its neighbors or allies in the region. And of course, the relationship between Turkey and Israel is giving us quite a lot of concern recently. In the opposite way, the Turkish-Iranian relationship, which to a certain extent seems to be improving, seems to become much better, but I think it was General Brom or maybe Professor Sasser who mentioned that there is going to be very soon a collision of interest between Turkey and Iran. Yes, and I put it some time ago, I even asked, would there be another Ottoman-Safavid collision on the borders? It looks nice, like a parallel, yes. And then, of course, the Turkish relationship to the Arab world is absolutely surprising, I think. But I also think that there is a limit to that too. And of course, Turkish-US, Turkish-EU relationship also has to be taken into account. Now, Iran is an emerging regional power, but I think that its limits has been reached already, even if it still has the potential of making very serious, causing very serious concerns. But more or less, its possibilities are reached in the region. And I think with regard to Israel, what strikes me is that the strategic environment had changed by the time, even before the Arab Spring started. And again, I agree very much with the previous speakers and the General Brom was addressing the issue. Formerly, it was mostly secular state actors, and now we have ideology-based and also non-state actors who are defining or who are constituting Israel's strategic environment. And the public's Islamization, of course, cannot be taken out of context in the Arab world as well, in the Arab world. When we come to the Arab Spring, I think I would just like to mention some very striking factors. I see two parallel developments. One of that is that the Arab unity, which we have written off, said, okay, it's outdated. But what I feel when I talk to many Arab colleagues from Morocco to Egypt during this year, that there is a sense of new pride, the Arab unity filled with a new sense of belonging together. So this is it is very emotional. It is very emotional. This is a new development, I think, and there is another development that has become increasingly evident, especially in the Arab Spring events, namely that we usually do not call the Arab states nation states, not in the European sense. But in all the events, it was evident that I am a Tunisian, I am an Egyptian, I am a Libyan, I am a Syrian, whatever. So these two developments are perceived at the same time. These were peaceful, unorganized mass demonstrations with no leadership. Yet they could reach some results. Well, in Libya, of course, and in Syria, it is not so peaceful. But when they started, Tunisia and Egypt were quite striking. How come that the Arabs, whom we always just said, yes, authoritarian regimes, and they don't know democracy, but they go out in masses and for long days and weeks, and they achieve their political aims peacefully. However, I think even at that time it was clear that since they have no organizing force behind them, that public will is unfortunately not enough. It may be very democratic, but it is not enough. And now we are seeing the consequences afterwards. It seems, and we will have to see, that there is a new generation of Islamic parties coming to power. I do not really believe in that, but this is what they project, the so-called Muslim Democrats. I think it was used first by Erdogan Bey in Turkey. However, these Islamist parties increasingly try to tell the outside that, oh, we are like AKP. Why? Because they see that AKP is an accepted partner in international relations. However, I would also like to claim that there is a very serious social background, and Professor Susser was referring to that we have to acknowledge the fact that here we are facing something that is different. Now, what is that is different? And I would like to claim that we say that these are authoritarian regimes. Yes, they are. But what is at the background? I think the background is patrimonial or neo-patrimonial societies, where political decisions are still made according to the traditional patterns, where real power is held and the relevance of power is dependent on the closeness to the center of the regime, to the leader, per se, be it a king, be it a prime minister, be it a president. And this is still there. At the same time, because of first the colonization, now because of then because of the Cold War, and now because of globalization, these countries also have to adapt to the international norms. However, this will be an adaptation only. These traditional powers will take on the forms as required by the outside, so they will form parties, they will make elections, they will even have a constitution. And then we will see, okay, but this parliament does not behave as it should. These parties are not like they should. There is one monoparty and the others are just there if they are born with at all. So this is what is, I think, at the background of all the changes in the Arab world, and each and every Arab country will have to be valued according to its way of movement, from one edge where it's still the ruler and the subject, to the other extreme where it is our ideal of a democracy. And what can be the driving force that will help the Arabs move forward? It is, as it was in Europe, the so-called third class or the third order. Those people who are in the economy or the technocracy, who will have enough power and will in the end, because economic liberalization is going on here as well. So there may be a class in development, a group of people who demand a say in power. I think that in Tunisia, for example, they are much closer to that. In other countries where these economic powers were taken over by the elites themselves, it will take a longer time. However, each and every country is different, and we will have to see if they are going towards the democracy. Well, let's vote for the benefit of Tunisia. Or if they stay and if they form another neo-patrimonial society, I think, as will be the case in Libya. And here, this is why the old forms of the society, the tribes or sectarianism, are coming to the fore. When I'm talking to my Iraqi friends or even Libyans, I was a student in Libya for 1 year, 30 years ago. I was never, ever aware of the fact that there were tribes in the country. And I lived there for 1 year. I could only see on the tattooed faces of the old ladies. But it was not the rules of the game at the time. And I see a great danger that now with these political developments, in Iraq it happened to the sectarian issues, and in Libya it is happening to the tribes. Because of the political events, these already hollowed frameworks, or maybe only social frameworks, are regaining a new political meaning. And I think this is very dangerous, because it will mean that when a new army is formed, they will form it along sectarian or tribal basis, or a new party along sectarian or tribal basis, or even the police forces and everything else. And I think this is a real danger. I don't see what can be done against it. And I think I would just like to say again that I'd like to add that I feel that the Palestinian issue is a real core problem. We were not aware how deep-rooted it is in the Arab societies. It is still the cause with which in a couple of hours you can bring huge masses of people into the street. In the beginning of the Arab Spring, it seemed that they have forgotten about the Palestinian case, as you said. However, it was a temporary issue, and we have seen what happened when the Palestinians in the end went to the UN. It is a very emotional question, I agree with you, and I think that it should be addressed, because I just don't believe that there could be any settlement, any arms control issue even, if this is not addressed in a way that could be credible for all these 360 turning into 450 million people. We cannot do about that. This is a huge public will, and I think that that should be somehow addressed, because otherwise we will not be able to, I am afraid, to make arms control in a meaningful way. I am not sure that this really is the right moment to do arms control. However, arms control is always good. But I think I have my doubts just because of the reasons that I have enlisted. Too much diversity, too much development on the Arab side, and the changes produced a much more anti-Israeli stance. And the last thought that in the end, after the Arab Spring, it seems that temporarily maybe, but Turkey and Iran seem to be the winners. How long this may go, I am not sure. I think there are limits, but this will also have to be taken account. Thank you very much for your attention.